Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
This is Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine, and you are listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts. Today's topic is a really important one. It's motivating our kids. As parents of children with ADHD and learning disabilities, we pretty much know what they need to do, and many of us have read techniques for helping our children succeed at school, for structuring homework. But how do we motivate a child or a teen who simply seems unwilling or unable to focus on the tasks at hand? What is going on? I'm very pleased today to welcome back Ann Dolin. Many of you may have heard Ann's session a couple of weeks ago, which was terrific. She is the president and director of Educational Connections, which is a tutoring firm based in Virginia. Her website, Educational Connections, has got some great resources on it. She not only holds a BA in child psychology and advanced degrees in special ed and learning disabilities, but she is a recognized expert in education and learning disability issues. She has worked probably with over 20 years of teaching and tutoring experience, worked with over 8,000 students. She's on the board of CHAD, which is the Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder, the national organization, which we always highly recommend to you, as well as the International Dyslexia Association, and she's done hundreds of presentations. She's the author of an award-winning book, which I have to say helped me raise my children, called Homework Made Simple, Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework. So with that, let me turn it over to Ann. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. We are very appreciative of your time.
Well, thank you for having me, Susan. I appreciate it. I love to talk about this topic, motivation, because it affects so many children. Whether your student has ADHD or doesn't, it doesn't matter. Motivation is at the crux of learning and academic success. You know, I talk to a lot of parents who call our office. I own a tutoring company called Educational Connections. They call looking for an executive functioning coach. They call looking for an academic tutor. And they are really, really worried about their kids. And Susan, on the next slide, we'll see a little bit about what's fueling that anxiety. You know, I live in the Washington, D.C. area in Virginia, and our top state university is University of Virginia. Well, in 2005, the average incoming GPA was 3.7, but just 8 years later, in 2013, the average incoming GPA of a freshman was 4.21. Parents feel this pressure of their child's future, getting into a good college, any college, and they see that grades matter. And motivation is really the crux of that GPA. And as parents, we get really nervous when our child isn't performing in school. And we do all kinds of things. You know, sometimes our kids will get a poor grade on a test, and we may email the teacher on behalf of our child. We often pay for grades. Sometimes we will punish our kids for not bringing home good marks. And ultimately, our relationship with our kids can be defined by academics. And it's especially influenced by ADHD. You know, when our kids struggle in school, it's so difficult for them to have a positive outlook on academics. In fact, I was just talking to a psychologist friend of mine, and she said, you know what, I think ADHD should be renamed totally. Instead of an attention disorder, I think it should be called a disorder of motivation. Because when school is hard and learning is hard, the natural outcome is difficulty sustaining motivation, short and long term. So let's talk about what the research says. Does it work to pay for grades? Do incentives help kids achieve? And I love this study. It was done by a number of Harvard researchers, and they had $6.3 million in grants, and they wanted to look at the effects of monetary compensation on achievement. So they had kids from 261 schools in elementary, middle, and high school in New York, Washington, Chicago, and Dallas. And they wanted to see, well, does paying kids for certain things have a positive outcome? So they paid for things like improved report card grades. They paid elementary kids for reading books. For each book, the child earned $2. They paid kids for going to class. They paid them for completing homework. And they paid them for improving their standardized test scores. So think to yourself, when do you think paying for academic performance worked? Look at those 5 things. What do you think? The answer is that when kids were paid for reading books, when they were paid for going to class, and they were paid for completing homework, they improved. That there was a positive correlation there. But they showed absolutely no improvement despite monetary compensation for report card grades or standardized test scores. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it's because rewards work, and they work pretty well for short, simple tasks. You know, you go to class, easy done. You read a book, not too hard. If you improve your standardized test scores, that's a long period of time between tests. Even report cards, that's 9 weeks later. So anything that is long-term or that requires a lot of executive functioning skills is not easily rewarded. I had a parent come up to me after a presentation at a school. I go around and I talk to lots of parent groups, and I really enjoy it. And this parent came up to me after a middle school presentation, and she said, you know, last year I told my daughter, she was in 6th grade at the time, that if she got straight A's, I would take her to Disney World. And I thought this was a fantastic idea because her whole life she wanted to go to Disney World, and she was so happy. She was jumping up and down, and she swore up and down to me that she was going to really work hard and improve her grades. And it was fantastic. For about 3 days, she came home, she broke open the book, she was studying, she was doing her homework, and then things kind of fell apart. She was doing less and less homework. She wasn't following through. And Mom said, I don't know what I did wrong. And the reason is that 9 weeks, that report card grade, just like the study, is too far away. And when you have an 11-year-old 6th grader, that child probably, especially if you have ADHD, doesn't know how to get from start to finish. So what works on a daily basis? The when-then approach definitely works. For a high school student, when you've studied for a period of time, then you can take the car up to the store. I know you're responsible, maybe for a younger student, when I've seen you completed your spelling, then you can play outside. But some kids need beyond just the verbal exchange. And on the next slide, you'll see a sample of a basic contract. And actually, I hope nobody on this webinar knows my son. He's in 6th grade as well, and he has ADHD. I made this after-school agreement with him. I didn't call it a contract. It was an agreement because we all talked about it, he and my husband and I, and we agreed upon it. But in his case, he got an iPhone 5C for Christmas, and the iPhone 5C has become his life. And it has begun to interfere with his schoolwork. And we've always had a routine after school, but with the advent of electronics, it kind of slipped away. And so I felt he needed kind of a reboot in a way. He needed just to have his phone for a short period of time. So I took it away for about 5 days. And then in the agreement, you can see it's going to be returned on March 3rd. And then beginning March 4th, he can have it for a half hour a night after dinner. So you can see he has a break, and then he has something called designated homework time. And this is a great idea for younger students, even middle school students. The rule of thumb is that kids should have about 10 minutes of homework per grade level. So for him, he has 60 minutes of homework, whether he said he had it or not, and he had to sit and do work. And after that, after dinner, in order to get his phone, he had to show me his completed work along with the verification from his assignment notebook. Sometimes he writes things down, sometimes he doesn't, but he had to back it up with our homework portal and show me that as well, called Blackboard. So, and at the very beginning, you can't see it, but we all signed it, so we were all in agreement. And then at night, he was expected to read in his room, and it's been going very well because we needed it in writing as a family. Now, on the next slide, you'll see what long-term can look like. Long-term is much harder. That would be a short-term type of thing. You do your work, you show it to me, I'm just checking that it's done, I'm not checking for accuracy, then you get your phone. But what about when you want your child to get better grades and it's really far away? Well, that's not going to work for younger kids. So for younger kids, it needs to be something like, you show me your assignment notebook. Show me your assignment notebook Monday through Thursday, and then you can go out with your friends. So I need to see it all these days for your reward at the end of the week. But older kids can sustain that motivation for a longer period of time. A high school student, a 16-year-old, if they have a 2.8 GPA and you want them to have the privilege of driving the family car, and you might say, if your GPA is 3.0 each quarter, you have access to the family car. That's perfectly acceptable. But in both of these instances, the bar should absolutely be low. And usually we talk about, oh, the bar has to be high. Not with kids with ADHD. It should be low to ensure they are successful. They have experienced too many issues of not being successful in the past. So we want to make sure they're successful. And sometimes we need to put it in writing. How do we do this? Let's say our child comes home and has a D in 8th grade English, and we're really mad. We're fuming. How could you get a D? And our child is upset too. We could go at it with our student at that moment when anxiety is high and we're all upset. But really the best thing to do is schedule a time to meet and say to your child, you know what, let's talk about this. How about if we meet after dinner this evening? Or I have a meeting tonight, but this is important to me. Let's meet tomorrow evening at 7:30. Schedule a time to meet and then open up the dialogue. Tell me what's going on in English. What do you think constituted this grade? What would be different? What do you want to do differently this quarter? Maybe your child says something like, well, I'm really having trouble with my essays. Maybe I could see my teacher. And you want to follow up to make sure that your child is doing that. But you definitely want to avoid taking away things that give your child a lot of pleasure, like sports or clubs, things that they're good at, because those things will really fuel their academic motivation later on. So in the end, we want to be realistic about expectations and know that success breeds success. There are certainly no quick fixes when it comes to motivation. Here's what the research says. Kids have to have 3 things in order to be motivated. 1 is value. The task has to be meaningful to the student. I had a parent a couple weeks ago who had a younger child, and she was looking at 6th grade, and she wanted to see what's the lay of the land for private high schools in our area for 9th grade. What's it going to take to get my child into one of these schools? And we talked about it, and she said, I don't know what to do. I'm so frustrated. I keep telling my son that grades matter, and if he doesn't get good grades now, he's never going to get into a school in a couple of years. And the problem in that case was that the child didn't see the value in getting grades. He didn't yet have a vision. The second thing that kids have to have is this thing called expectancy. You have to expect that you can do the task, so you have to be able to believe in yourself, and that you are actually able to do it. So your student has a math test in a week. He says, oh yes, I can absolutely study for an hour every day, but when it gets down to it, he might actually not be able to sustain attention. And then lastly, the school environment must be supported. You must have these 3 things for motivation. As parents, we cannot motivate our child. We can't. There is no flip switch to motivation. There are no quick fixes. But what we can do is make the environment ripe for learning and ripe for motivation. A couple of things that really help. One is having a routine. Kids are more likely to follow through if they know what to expect. There are 5 times kids can do homework: right after school, after about a 30-minute break, before dinner, after dinner, or before bed. Younger kids do well with right after school or a short break, about a half hour. Older students, especially those with ADHD, these are the kids that live by procrastination, they're going to want to push the envelope and start after dinner or late at night. And late at night is never a good idea, as we all know. You may want to get into the routine and encourage your child to at least open the books before dinner. Having a designated homework time, like I mentioned before, that period of time to do homework is also really helpful. There are other organizational things you can do with your child. In my book, Homework Made Simple, I have a whole chapter devoted to organization because I think it's such an integral part of school success. But a couple of ideas that are really easy to implement. One is a launching pad. And with this idea, when your child is done with homework, it goes in his binder in the backpack, and the launching pad. And this is just a bin or a basket. by the door in which your child exits. And your child has to, in the morning, in order to launch into a new day, they take everything from the launching pad and they're good to go. So there's not a lot of chaos in the morning with looking around for the backpack, for the binder, even shoes, musical instruments, other things like that that the child needs that next morning to bring to school are all in that launching pad. The other idea I found to be very, very successful for kids is this idea called the clean sweep to maintain organization. So sometimes once you've had an educational coach, a tutor, or you've helped your child to get organized, they're not going to maintain it on their own. They need weekly upkeep sessions. So this is 20 minutes you put on as a reminder in your phone once a week, and during this clean sweep, everybody in the house gets organized. You can turn up your kid's favorite hip-hop music, whatever it is, blast the music, and it's everybody's duty to get organized. So your child might clean out his backpack, organize his binders. You can clean out the junk drawer, organize your receipts, whatever it might be. Everyone is in on the act. I also have a number of ebooks on my website that are free, and you can go to ectutoring.com/ebooks and find ebooks on organization, helping with homework, even how to study for the ACT and SAT if you have a child with ADHD. The other thing that we know to make the environment right for learning is that kids do not need to do homework in the same place day in and day out. In fact, it really should be a comfortable place for your child, relatively clutter and distraction free, but it can vary. So maybe one day your child does homework at the dining room table, the next day it's in your home office. All of those places are okay. The other thing that helps make the environment right for learning, and this is for kids that really have a great draw to their electronics, is to have a no tech time for the entire family. This could be 40 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour after dinner where everybody drops everything technology related and reads. Kids can work on their homework, whatever it might be, but there is no technology. Without distractions, kids are far more motivated to do their work. So let's talk a little bit about distractions. Many of our students think that they can multitask, and this is very common of kids with ADHD. They often find that stimulation is helpful for them. I once went to a girl's house, and she told me she was studying. She did. She had her history book in her lap, but she also had her earbuds in. She was listening to music. She had her Facebook up on her computer, and she was texting. She had her phone in her left hand. So she was, in her words, studying, but in my words, she was really task switching. And that's when you really aren't able to concentrate on all those things. Studies find that you're actually just switching your attention very quickly, and you're never doing one thing well at one time. We also know that music is okay for rote tasks. So music is perfectly fine if you have to, retype an essay that you've written by hand. You have to write your spelling words 3 times each. But regardless of the type of music, it's not good for studying and for retention. We also know that the computer can be a blessing and a curse. These days, in my county, we have a directive that all social studies and math books will be online by the end of 2014. And so now kids are accessing their assignments online. And for our kids with ADHD, this can be especially tricky because often they have a lot of windows and applications open at the bottom of their screen. You may walk over and see that the YouTube channel is open, maybe their Facebook pages, they're surfing the internet and online shopping, whatever it might be, but they've got a lot going on. And what's interesting is that the more applications a student has open, the more distracted he's going to be, which makes complete sense. But also there's a direct correlation between the number of applications a student has open and their grade point average. The more open apps, the lower the GPA. I find that fascinating. So when it comes to phones, many kids have this thing called FOMO. Psychologists have coined this phrase, fear of missing out, because they see that so many kids actually become anxious when they don't have their phone. So for these students, a tech break actually really helps, and it helps to motivate them to get their work done. So they put their phone in the other end of the room or in a separate room. They do their homework for about 20 minutes, never more than a half hour because that's too long. They're more likely to procrastinate. They do their homework for about 20 minutes, and they get up and they physically walk over, get their phone, send a couple texts, and then they're back to homework. that's much better than having the phone with them during homework. I can definitely recommend a fantastic book when it comes to communicating with your child. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's an oldie but goodie. And so often we're just so quick as parents to get on to the next thing that we're really not sitting back and listening to our kids. We also want to praise our kids at every turn. Great book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. And in it, she found that through her research, she's out of Stanford, that when we praise intelligence, kids get the message that they're either smart or they're not smart. And there's not a lot they can do about it. They're more likely to save face if if they're worried about getting a good grade. They might say, oh, I didn't study, that's why I didn't get a good grade, instead of persevering and actually working hard. So we know through her research that when we praise our kids and say things like, oh, I can see that you're working really hard on that essay. I love your first line. Or the reason you got an A on that spelling test is because you put time into rewriting those words. Anytime we praise our kids for effort, that is motivating because kids see that if they put forth effort, they can make a change in the outcome. We also want to notice our students' strengths. A friend of mine has just a really neat son, and he has ADHD. And he's now in college, but when he was in school, it was really tough for him. They argued a lot over grades, but she noticed something special about her son. She noticed that he had this penchant for being able to fix cars. And as much as she wanted to say, put those automotive magazines down and get to work, and she did that at times, but she didn't always dwell on his academics. She did get tutors for him to help him be as successful as he could be, but she also fostered his natural talents, which was working on cars. He loved cars. And in the end, they actually found a college called Belmont College in Tennessee that has an automotive racing program. And so all along the way, it would have been easier for her to focus on the things that he needed to improve, but she didn't. She honed away on what he was good at. We always want to mention our kids' strengths. I have an older son who's a sophomore in high school, and I tell him a lot, I see that you have an eye for marketing. You're so good at knowing what other people think. And he listens to that. He won't always listen to everything I say, but I notice that when I praise his strengths, he's more likely to listen to me when I have something important to say. You also could consider spending 15 minutes a day on the activity that your child loves. You may have a child who is really invested in Xbox and you hate Xbox. And you might still open up the dialogue and say, tell me why you love this level. What is it that characters do in this level that you find interesting? How do you think they programmed this information? How did they create this level of Call of Duty or whatever it is? So we know that with kids with ADHD, 80% of the feedback that they receive in school is negative. 80% of feedback kids with ADHD get in school is negative. That to me is just almost paralyzing. But as parents, we have the opportunity to turn the 80-20 around and be that 80% that's positive in their lives, to kind of be like the coach and not the critic. Because so often kids with ADHD will, especially girls, they will go head-to-head with their moms. And so often boys will have the opposite reaction when they're really, really struggling, and they will start to withdraw and become very quiet. So on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the push and pull of academics. It's important with a child with ADHD to realize that the child may have skill deficits and may have more executive functioning issues that are limiting their success and that are contributing to their difficulties with motivation. I was at a special ed conference. I did a talk last year, and I'll never forget this parent that came up to me, and she said, Ann, I wanted to let you know I got a tutor through your company this year for math and for algebra for my daughter because I had completely had it with her. I was just so sick of arguing with her. She wasn't doing her homework. She wouldn't stay after school with her teacher. We were just cats and dogs when it came to this math class, and I just thought she was completely lazy. And I got a tutor, and then after she worked with the tutor came to me and said, she's not lazy. she really is like Swiss cheese. She has holes in her content knowledge. And once they were able to patch that up and she gained success and saw that she was able to have control over her grades and the effort that she put in had a direct payoff, all of a sudden math became a pleasure for the student. It was the first time she was successful. So in her case, because she was missing so much instruction in class, because of her ADHD, she really needed somebody to re-explain things. So it was a more of a subject-based area when it came to her difficulties with motivation. However, sometimes you'll see that your child needs support with those executive functioning issues. They may need an educational coach. That is not you. You have a history with your child, and you could say the exact same things a tutor or an executive functioning coach could say, but it comes from you, and sometimes our kids just won't listen. Other times we see that our kids' difficulties with school are not just during school time. They may start to lose interest in things before that they found that they loved, like sports. Maybe they were in the robotics club and they stopped going. Whatever it might be, sometimes when it's bigger than academics, that's when you want to think of maybe I should see a counselor, or maybe I need other outside help. So in the end, it's just important to support our kids as best we can with ADHD and to realize that underneath it all, if we peel back the layers of the onion, it's often not that our kids are unmotivated. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they don't care. It's just that they have other issues, skill-based issues, executive functioning issues, that have so limited their success that it's easier to do nothing than something, because they haven't experienced that success in the past. I want to let you know my email address is ann@ectutoring.com, and I can be reached at any time. Feel free to email me with any questions. On our website, ectutoring.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. We're just about to put one out on studying for the ACT and the SAT and what's a good score and how can you help your child in those issues. I just wrote a blog on how much you should help with homework, because that's really a big question I get for parents as well. So check out our website. Happy to answer any questions. But Susan, let's go ahead and take the first question.
Okay, thanks, Ann. That was great. I love, despite everything that we're all going through, our kids are not lazy. They're not stupid. They're facing difficulties. We do have a large number of parents who have said that their children just seem unmotivated to do their schoolwork. They're failing. They just don't prepare. They're really, have already gotten pretty far along in school and are just have not established the value that you talk about of that doing well in school is important. Where do you start? Obviously, it would be better if these motivational the values had been established early. But if you're already with a kid in middle school or high school who just doesn't seem to care, which is what is frequently mentioned by parents, my child just doesn't seem to care. Where do they start? Where does the parent start?
That's a great question, Susan. Let me back up on that and say that this is, to me, very fascinating. The Gallup poll did a survey, and they surveyed about 100,000 kids across the country, and they wanted to assess a couple of things when it came to academic performance. And one of the criteria that is important for school success is this thing called engagement, and it's basically enthusiasm for school. And what they found is that engagement peaks at 5th grade, and then after that, there's a lot of downhill. So in 5th grade, 8 out of 10 kids report that they're engaged in school, but by middle school, by 7th grade, it's 6 and 10, and by 9th grade, it's 4 and 10. So we see a downward trajectory in motivation, and then it starts to go up a little bit at the end of high school when kids kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. So as a parent, what you have to think is this kind of normal, or is it outside of what is normal? And it also depends on the age of your child, too. So if you see these things when you have an elementary schooler, you have to get help. I mean, that's a major issue. An older student, you have to gauge what the issue of value. So many times our kids don't see that the impact of their grades is directly influencing their choices in college. They see, they're in the here and now. It's either now or it's not now. They don't really get 2 years away. And as parents, what we can do is, although we recognize that grades are important, we really take the emphasis off of grades, which is the product, and put it on the process, which is studying. And that means all the things I mentioned, making the environment right for motivation, maybe hiring outside tutors. If you can't afford a professional tutor, you get a college student. But providing your child that support along the way, and then at the same time, recognizing your strengths, child's strengths. You have a daughter in middle school who loves animals. Maybe she can volunteer at the local vet's office and, pet the animals, whatever it might be. But find out what your child's strength is and then provide them opportunities for honing that natural talent. Because in the end, you kind of have to get them through school until they can find their vision. And their vision is so often related to their natural talent.
That's a really important point. Olivia just posted, is there an aptitude test for teenagers? Is there a way to figure out what would really inspire my child? What would he be really interested in?
Mm-hmm. There are many career counselors for older students. It depends on the age of your child. I know many of the high school students we've worked with have gone and done career assessments to look at, where are their natural strengths? And if you email me at ann@ectutoring.com, I can send you some of that information. Absolutely. But for younger kids, I think it's allowing them to try a number of activities without going overboard. Sometimes, as parents, we want our kids to be successful. We see our daughter, doing a ballet waltz across the kitchen, and we're like, oh my gosh, she must be talented ballet. I'm going to sign her up for ballet classes. We don't need to do that, but we just want to find, try a couple things. What do you naturally gravitate towards?
Okay. One of the questions that comes up frequently, and I've heard this in other contexts, is parents have a hard time figuring out how involved they should be. Mm-hmm. People are writing in, my child won't do anything unless I'm sitting there with them, giving them carrots. At what point do I step away? Am I enabling this? It's really difficult to know as a parent, how involved is too involved. And I think many of the people on this session are wondering, would love some guidance on that.
Sure. Well, first, Susan, let's remember that a child with ADHD may have the maturity of a student a couple of years younger. So you're working with a 12-year-old. It could be that your child's maturity is more like a 9-year-old. So they're going to do things that are innately frustrating to you. They may be, even at 12 years old, still having meltdowns over homework. And those things are pretty common. The answer is that there has to be a happy medium. So sitting next to your child sends the message that you cannot do anything unless I'm sitting here. But saying, you should be able to do this by now, you're 12 years old, and not involving yourself is a recipe for disaster as well. So the first thing, you have to make sure that the work the child is assigned is reasonable. Sometimes parents get really frustrated and they think that their child just doesn't care, but really there's a disconnect between the student's ability to sustain focus for an extended period of time on work that's innately going to be difficult and the level that the teacher is assigning. Also, I mentioned last time that teachers, there was a study that showed teachers underestimate homework time by about 50%. So let's say a third grade teacher thinks she's giving a half-hour homework. Well, really, she may be giving 45 minutes. Throw ADHD on top of there, and maybe the kid is doing homework for an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half. That's just too much for a third grader. So you have to figure out, is the amount of homework reasonable, and is the level of the homework reasonable? Can your child generally do it on their own? Because homework should be practice. If you know that it's reasonable, you want to have the expectation of, show me what you have, show me that you can do the first couple, and then walk away. So you need to get your child started, but you do not need to sit with your student for the entire time.
Okay. So get them started, check in periodically. I guess another question that people have is breaks. They're aware, people are saying, my child needs a break in the homework, but then sometimes that break stretches out to half an hour, 45 minutes. It's hard to get to make the transition. What's your sense on how to structure the time of doing homework? And should the parents step back in as the child changes tasks, like they finish math and then they move to English, so forth?
I would say help as little as you can, but you may find that you have the child who, you say take a 5-minute break, and before you know it, they're up in the room playing with Legos 45 minutes later. Those are the kids that need more oversight. You could try using a timer. I love the timer. A lot of people have them because they're super visual. There's a red disc that moves. And some kids, when you say, take a break for 10 minutes, they have no clue. Even though they know 10 minutes, when they have really 9 minutes left, for example, they don't really know what 9 minutes is like. And so those kids need a visual reminder like a timer. And you can also, if you want, and this would be in extreme cases, you could give a reward. This child sets the timer, and if they're back sitting down within that 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is, maybe they can earn for, each time perhaps 10 minutes of later bedtime. That's a little bit harder to keep track with. But if you have an extreme circumstance where this has been a major problem for a period of time, then you're going to have to become very organized and start tracking these things so that you can start to get your child back into a routine.
Okay. There are some people who say that their children just flat out lie. They say they've done their homework when they haven't. They say they have no homework when they do. Do you have any thoughts on how to cope with a kid who, well, this person is actually describing her son as a con man. That may be a value judgment that maybe need to be addressed, but definitely lying about homework or about having done homework seems to be an issue for many people.
That is so tough. And it makes it even harder for us as parents when the teachers don't post the assignments on the online homework portal, because as parents, our kids say, oh, I didn't have any homework. And we're thinking, really? You haven't had any homework in 10 days? How can this be? And they've got nothing written on their assignment book. You ask your child to pull up Blackboard or your online portal. By the way, parents should not check that independently. They should do it with their child, and their child should pull it up for them. And there's nothing there. That's when you run into a problem. So first of all, I would absolutely email the teacher and bring it to her attention that this has become an issue and that you need to see the assignments online. Would it be possible for them to post the assignments? Many parents ask the teacher, especially in elementary school, can you initial my child's assignment notebook at the end of the day? And if they say your child has to bring it to me, that is not going to work for an ADHD kid. So you have to come up with some agreement with them that somehow a buddy or somebody else in the class remembers to get the teacher's initials. But I would also put it in the child's hands and use the trust but verify approach if the assignments are online. And, when your child says, I did my homework, but they're online, so you're trusting that they did. You say, that's great. I'm so glad you did. Why don't you show me? So you're verifying it. There needs to be something in place where if they can show you that they've done the homework, and again, do not check for accuracy, just check that they've done it.
Okay.
Then, there needs to be, up front, there could be a reward at the end of the night. There could be no reward because they haven't done it. But I would say have a system in place so that you can catch your child if they are not being truthful about homework. Okay. And then lastly, Susan, just real quick, I would absolutely set up a meeting with the teacher. Kids don't have as much wiggle room if the parent, the teacher, and the child are all in the meeting together.
That makes sense. Here's a common problem. Numerous people have posted this one, and it's certainly not the first time I think we've heard this. We're struggling because my son does the homework and the classwork, but forgets to turn it in. We have several people posting that, and I think in the past we've heard this referred to as the homework genie. The homework just somehow disappears.
That's really tricky, and it's even harder for middle school students, for example, because all of a sudden they've gone from this coddled nest of one elementary teacher to 7 separate teachers with 7 sets of expectations. One teacher might say, when you walk into class, put it in the basket. Another teacher may call for homework. So it can be confusing to kids. There was a study done on middle school boys with ADHD, and the researcher found that when kids had one dedicated homework folder, they were more organized and improved their grades because they were more likely to turn in the work. So I would suggest one homework folder. Even though kids have separate binders, perhaps, they've got one homework folder. In the left pocket it is labeled to be completed or to do, and the right side is completed homework. And that way, when they go, the teacher calls for it, they go to turn it in, they have it there. And it's always in the same place when they go to turn it in. Other kids have written themselves reminders. Some kids that have a phone will send themselves text reminders to go off at certain times as well.
Okay. What do you recommend to parents who are looking for a tutor? I think your idea of taking yourself out of this relationship if it's difficult or acrimonious makes sense. But do you have any advice for finding a tutor who understands ADHD children? Is that a special skill set? How does a parent tackle that question?
Sure. I found for kids with ADHD that experience with working with students with attention difficulties is definitely key, but personality match is so important. I found our students to be very personality specific, and they do so much better with, like anybody, but I'd say more so for kids with ADHD. They just really need to have that positive relationship. So you need somebody who's incredibly positive, has experience with ADHD, and can develop a rapport with your child and holds them accountable. Also, if the tutor is in touch with the teacher, that is almost always helpful. You'll have to sign a release, but sometimes taking you out of the picture so that you're not the one to say, Mrs. Smith called me today and said you didn't turn in your math homework. But when it's the tutor following up, it just makes the relationship between the parent and the child a little bit better.
Right. That makes sense. If the teacher is willing to work with a tutor, that seems great. A couple of other questions. Lots of kids seem to whip through their homework and not necessarily do it accurately or completely, and parents are wondering, should they be checking that homework to make sure that it's done thoroughly and accurately? How do they handle that?
It depends.
There's someone who says, my son just fills it in with random answers just to get it done quickly. It's sort of...
Oh, okay. In that case, that's a little bit different. So if you know that the answers are random, just so they can get done with homework and play outside with their friends or get on the computer, then you definitely have to call them on that. And but what I would say is it works far better if you define what good enough is before the student even starts. Because
interesting.
At the end, if you look at their math paper and you say, wait a second, this is a multiplication page and you did this all with division, do the whole thing over. What? I'm not doing the whole thing over. You're the meanest mom in the world. And it just becomes a huge battle. So it's better. That's why I mentioned help them get started, make sure that they understand what to do. Watch them, especially with younger kids, do the first couple because you can catch that in the beginning. But I would say for math, you do want to check the homework. But in writing, for example, kids with ADHD almost always have difficulty with writing. And looking for things like, is it written beautifully? Are all your words spelled right? Do you have a capital letter? Are your transition sentences really good? Those details I leave up to the teacher. So I generally have the rule of thumb. You want to make sure that it's done and that it's generally right, but you don't have to check for total accuracy. Leave the quality up to the teacher. And you can also email the teacher and let her know. I did that with my younger son once. And I said, I just want to let you know. I know because this one year she gave out A's for pretty much doing nothing. And I said, I just want to let you know what's going on in our house. Ethan thinks that this is good. It's not using no periods and capital letters. I think he can do better than that. I just wanted to let you know. And then the next day he came back with his paper and the teacher had written on it what he had to do. So I like that because I felt like she backed me up.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned the problems of ADHD kids with writing. I think that's just so common. We hear that constantly. Do you have any, just real problems starting writing, getting words down? What do you suggest for parents whose kids just have real problems getting started writing?
Sure. Certainly graphic organizers help. Oftentimes our kids are just stymied. They will sit there, and they do this in class too, and it's frustrating for teachers, but they'll sit there and say, I can't think of anything to say, anything to write. I don't know how to start. So for those students, even asking them, what do you want to say first, second, third, helping them just jot down their ideas. Some parents of younger children will say, well, what do you want the first sentence to be? Tell me what you want it to say, and then they write it down. And I say, okay, how about the second sentence? And they write it down. And they say, what about the third sentence? And the child says the sentence. And then the child can either start writing from there, or they can recopy what the parent has already written down on their own piece of paper. Sometimes kids need that foundational support to get started, and then they have success. So I would say, you don't always want to do that, because then they get used to it, and they'll say, well, Dad, can't you do that when you write the first 3 sentences for me? You don't always want to fall into that trap. A lot of students use Inspiration, which is a great writing software for kids that tend to think more visually and need graphic organizers, need a framework before they start. But I would say...
What is it called? Inspiration?
Inspiration. So there's 2 versions. There's Inspiration, which is for grades 6 and up, and then there's Kidspiration, which is for younger elementary school students. And it's basically a graphic design, a way of putting in, for example, the student needs to write a compare and contrast essay. It will give you the template of compare and contrast. You type in what you want to, just a couple of words into the frames, and then you press a button and it dumps it into Word. So now you have an outline that you can elaborate on. And what I love about this software, but many new Windows and Apple programs have this feature as well, is that it will read it back to you. And so often kids will read their writing as one way, but it doesn't really say that. But when they hear it, they can find their mistakes more readily.
It seems so true that speaking and listening are so helpful to kids with ADHD. Can you repeat the name of that software again?
Sure.
Inspiration.
Inspiration. Yes. Okay. Inspiration.
Is that an app or a software that you find online? Or
I'm sure it is an app. I've only used it on the computer.
Okay.
But there's also a free 30-day download. It's a little bit confusing at first, so if you do download it with your child, make sure to follow the template guidelines.
Okay.
And that you understand how to use it before just saying to your child, oh, why don't you try this, because they might be confused.
Yeah, so you have to go through it with them. So thank you to Laura, who posted the actual URL, which is www.inspiration.com. So that sounds great. Another problem that people mention is that their children, even if they're willing and motivated, are so slow. It takes them so much longer than other kids to do the homework that they get really discouraged or tired. Or, I think this was certainly a problem in my household, just the length of time that it took, my daughter to do her homework. And she was very motivated. What are your thoughts on that? It's really an issue for an ADHD kid, I think.
It is. It's a huge issue for kids with ADHD, and sometimes as parents, I think it's okay to intervene and to just help them get it done. I've worked with a lot of kids over the years that were very slow processors, and that is very consistent with ADHD. They could handle the content, but just
the speed. Right.
Yes, the speed. And honestly, sometimes I would say, tell me how you want to finish this, and I would, they would tell me verbally, and I would finish typing it for them. I often would email the teachers and say, look, just wanted to let you know, because sometimes teachers have no idea how long it takes kids. When I was a teacher, I had a parent come to me at a November conference one year, and she said, I'm going to move my daughter out of your class. And I said, what are you talking about? Because I love this kid. She was a great kid. And the parent said, I'm just so done with this homework. She has 3 hours of homework, and I took her off the gymnastics team. And I was completely floored. I had no idea she was doing that much homework fast forward, the child ended up having ADHD, but I wish this parent had come to me earlier. I would have definitely, without an IEP or 504, I would have made accommodations. So it's really important to go to the teacher and say, any way that Mary can do 20 problems instead of 30 on those types of nights. Not all the time, but is this a possibility? And
so if you're really aware that your child is working hard, trying hard, but it's just too much, speak up is what, that makes sense.
Absolutely speak up. And then be careful when your child gets older about course selection. I've seen too many kids with ADHD say, I want to take 2 AP classes and an honors class, and just the volume of reading, they can actually do the reading, but what they're comprehending with that level of work is not good enough. It's too much for them.
Right.
They want to be like their peers, but they just have to step back and think, can I handle this? And am I going to have a life outside of school?
Yeah, that's a real struggle. And for my daughter, who, just has to be really careful about how much she puts on her plate, and she, always wants to tackle more. And, it's a struggle. It really is. She's in college now, and she's having to really be careful about her course load just because it's just overwhelming otherwise. And she plays, and some people have mentioned this, she places very high expectations on herself. It's almost the opposite of unmotivated. She's maybe way too perfectionist, and there are a couple of other people who have mentioned that some kids just really obsess about doing everything correctly and put themselves under a lot of pressure.
They do. Like you said, it's kind of the flip side, but so often, even with avoidance and procrastination, we think our kids just don't care, but sometimes they think it's either perfect or it's not. It's an A or an F. They don't really see the gray. And often, kids that are so fixated on perfection, they're perfectionists by nature, it's really rooted in anxiety. And I found that, getting therapy and counseling actually can address that far more than academic tutor. So having it in combination really can do wonders for those students.
That's really interesting. I think the anxiety definitely comes to play here oftentimes. Here's just to lighten the topic, a number of people have posted that they're really concerned because their children are unmotivated in terms of sports. And in one person, she said this is a real problem in their household. I mean, it's just part of their family culture that sports and being active is important, and their child is just not motivated at all to do any activity. What are your thoughts on that?
It's important for kids to get out of the house and to do something that is physical. There's no doubt about it, because many of our kids would be very happy sitting in the basement playing on their video games all day. And they'd be, perfectly fine with that. So I think the answer to that is to say to your child, I don't care what you do. Here are a bunch of sports you can choose from. Here are a number of activities. Pick one thing. And so you're not saying you absolutely have to play soccer because you've played soccer for the last 5 years and everybody in your family plays soccer, but it's really up to you. The point here is to have some physical activity because that's good for your health.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen people who have a sort of a list of the family rules, and someone I knew had, 30 minutes of exercise every day, and it was interesting that was just a family rule, and that's what she did. So interesting, sort of. I think that's what you're saying, that some activity is key.
Some activity, but maybe not having the bar too high. That would be
right, and not necessarily the one that is the family. If you say if the family is about soccer, maybe someone here has said that golf is what worked for their child. So that's interesting. There's a question here which I think is an interesting one. Do comprehension and reading and language disabilities go along with ADHD? And my sense is oftentimes they do. Is that yours, Anne? Or?
Absolutely. What I found with the students we've worked with over the years is that their reading skills are actually pretty good. It's not as much of an issue with their decoding, which is sounding out in their fluency, but it's a greater issue with understanding what they read. Last year I was teaching a study skills class over the summer, and we were talking about, how do you know when you've understood something? And the student said to me, I think he was a junior in high school, he said, well, sometimes I don't, but I just turn the page and I keep reading, and I'm just really hopeful that eventually I'll get it. And I think that kids often do that. They think, if I just keep reading some more, I'll get it. What we do know is that 84% of students study by rereading either the textbook or their notes, or reading in some capacity, and that's a huge visual load, and it's not conducive for retaining information. So if your child with ADHD does have difficulty remembering, it's always a good idea to use active reading strategies, and that's when, as you read, in the margin, if you can write in your book or use a Post-it note, you just jot down quickly something, an important phrase, or maybe a quick summary. At the end of the page or at the end of the section, it's important for kids to say to themselves, what's important here, and kind of engage in self-talk. Because without self-talk, it's very easy to keep on reading and not know what you're reading.
Right. And, Dev, I found that audio books were tremendously helpful for my ADHD child and my dyslexic child, two different children. Both audio books were hugely helpful to them.
Yes. In fact, there's research that shows that when you read a book that's just above your reading level, as opposed to listening to it, you're not going to become as fluent or remember as much. So if you have the audio version, and here's the key, you have to listen to it, but you follow along. So you can't be daydreaming in space and listen to it. You need to follow along with your finger or whatever. Right. You're going to improve your comprehension and fluency skills more than if you read it on your own.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what worked for my daughter would be to listen to it and then read it, sort of first one and then the other, or the two together, really helpful. I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. This is so fascinating, but here's a question that I think really underlies a lot of the questions people have asked. How does a parent tell whether this lack of motivation and the sort of discouragement is really about depression as opposed to something that responds to better management or values or incentives? How do you tell if your child's just depressed?
I'm not a mental health expert, and I generally think that if you're in doubt, seek outside help in the form of a counselor, because I often give parents names of therapists in my area, and I'll say, this could be just kind of the garden variety difficulty with school. I would just call this person and tell her about what's going on. And then she could tell you whether, I think you just need a tutor, or I think there's more here. Just calling that person is a good first step. But when you see that your child has decreased interest in things outside of school as well, so as I mentioned earlier, doesn't want to go out, out to dinner as much, doesn't want to do this or that, then often that's too a sign. Also, when you see that your child is very negative, they have a very a glass half full attitude, everything is not good or not fun or stupid, that's also a sign that there is something more serious.
Okay. Yeah, there is one person here who said, my daughter misses at least one day of school. She won't go to school. She says she's enjoying it. She says nothing's bothering her, but she just stays in her room and reads and won't go outside or go anywhere. So that sounds like an example of what you're describing as, may need to seek some outside help to see what's going on there.
Yes, and if parents live in the D.C. area, I'm happy to give them referrals, and they can email me at ann@ectutoring.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ann. This has been really terrific. Everyone, look at Ann's website, ectutoring.com. Really fabulous resources, and she just got so much knowledge and is so helpful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Ann.
Thank you, Susan.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.